Welcome. So today we're going to change pace and talking about crop circles. And the reason why we're talking about crop circles, I'm realizing I need to go into the kitchen, is because of all the shit's happening. There's too much shit happening. And this is going to be our little break. We're going to break into a different type of energy. And we're going to talk about what Freddy Silva is going to share with us on the crop circles. I'll be reading that. I'm going to start reading, and I might skip here and there. And we'll see what happens, how you feel about this, and how it makes you feel. All right, so buckle up, relax, maybe even close your eyes. Okay, so again, this is Secrets in the Field, The Science and Mysticism of Crop Circles by Freddy Silva. All right, let's see. I'm not going to, okay, we're going to go right into part one. All right, let's see. I'm not going to, okay, we're going to go right into part one. Whether or not to know all is necessary to know very little. But to know that very little, one must first know pretty much. George Gudenfear. This is a gentle rolling land, mostly soft with chalk and clay, and the eye is easily seduced by subtly curved lowland hills, rich in pastures and crop-bearing fields that sweep down from tree-peppered skylines. This terrain has borne witness to the activities of man since time immemorial. But there's a mystery here, for amid the sparsely wooded fields separated by hawthorn hedgerows rise like goose pimples blanketed in green felt. There are the long barrows and tumuli, survivors of tens of thousands of years of British reign and as many ideologies as man has cared to invent. Sharing this ancient landscape are the enchanting stone circles, their needles of stone stoic, determined and proud in the face of change, silent remnants of a gigantic interconnected network of sites that once covered the earth during Neolithic times. The same applies to the hill forts, those flattened terraces encircled by earthen embankment crown in the summits of sculpted chalk hills and artificially shaped promontories. Yet these forts, with their curious names such as Barbary Castle and Uffington Castle, have no walled fortification, nor do they appear to serve any military purpose. Indeed, there is a mystery here. For this is Wessex, an ancient southern English kingdom whose central region comprised the modern-day counties of Hampshire and Wiltshire, and once included parts of Dorset to the south, Somerset to the west, and Sussex to the east. With an air of nonchalance, Roger Sear walked into the circle of tall, swirled grass below the watchful gaze of the ancient Sidbury Rings Hills Fort. It was the summer of 1927, and young Roger was no stranger to the circles, which he affectionately called Witches' Rings. The one was similar to those he'd regularly stumbled upon in previous years throughout Sussex, but of special interest to him were the unusual effects generated by these curious markings. The magnetization of a knife that he had stuck into the soil at the center, a tickling sensation in his feet, the refusal of a dog to enter the circle, and the magnetization of a prized pocket watch, which resulted in its demise. On a previous occasion, Roger had seen the needle of his compass go berserk when he took it into a circle. From then on, it would only point to the circle instead of obeying magnetic north. He had also noticed that a smell akin to electrical burning filled the air, and that the grass seemed charged to the point that the bicycles of Roger and his companions said were made sufficiently full of static electricity to give them electric shocks. When they returned to the scene later, a second circle had appeared, and despite their exciting adventures, both boys returned home with painful headaches. 8 years later, at Hellion Bumstead, in Essex, a 10-year-old boy witnessed something even more miraculous. He saw a crop circle manifesting. Although it happened in a matter of seconds, the boy's adult companion brushed off the event as nothing more than the devil's twist, a kind of whirlwind blamed for instigating similar disturbances in the area since at least 1830. But that kind of winds were these that rushed about the countryside, creating perfectly formed circles and rings with swirled floors, sharply defined edges, and unaffected central tufts of plants. The swirled plants also appeared to have rehardened into the new horizontal position because attempts by both the boy and the farmer to raise them with a pitchfork have rehardened into the new horizontal position because attempts by both the boy and the farmer to raise them with a pitchfork resulted in the stems springing back down. Throughout early crop circle history, it is not unusual to hear local farmers and nature enthusiasts reminiscing about walking out around dawn to inspect the fields, only to come across these circles and rings. Some enthusiasts reminiscing about walking out around dawn to inspect the fields, only to come across these circles and rings, some as large as 60 feet in diameter, or flattened yet undamaged plants. They tell of farm animals behaving erratically, of sheep and cattle acting in a distressed manner prior to the circle's arrival, and superstitious farmhands refusing to touch the odd circles. Some recall sightings of UFO or bright by local police records. The greatest concentration of the events was in Wessex, as well as the Canadian prairie. The greatest concentration of the events was in Wessex, as well as the Canadian prairie. These early sightings were supported by 80 eyewitness accounts from people as far-flung as British Columbia and Australia having seen crop circles actually form. It is significant that most of these accounts remain unpublished, and yet they corroborate one another. They describe how the morning chores of birds abruptly stops, replaced by a trilling sound, followed by the agitation of the wheat heads, by tremendous vibration, and the collapse of a section of the field in seconds. Perhaps the young witness at Helion's Bumstead was not as prone to fantasy as he was led to believe. However, in the 1920s and 30s, with the wind and even the devil as prime suspect, no one bothered to seriously investigate these circles' curiosities in the crops, so no answers would be forthcoming for many decades. In 1965, there was a sudden eruption of simple circles around the Wiltshire town of Warminster, at the snaking Hapkin Hills, 20 miles to the northeast, and at St. Catherine's Hill outside Winchester in Hampshire. All three locations are rich and strangely shaped chalk hills crowned with long barrows of tumuli. They are equally steeped in folklore describing apparitions, visitations from nature spirits, and sightings of impossible aerial maneuvers performed by equally improbable luminous crafts. And yet, it would take another 15 years before a small report tucked away at the Wiltshire Times, August 15, 1980, finally grabbed the attention of science. The photos of three precise circles of flattened oats beneath the hill fort of Branton, with the plants spiraled and neatly laid along the ground, attracted the attention of meteorologists. Dr. Terence Mead, who went on to investigate as founder member of the Tornado and Storm Research Organization, his interest in weather phenomena led him to postulate that stationary whirlwinds were responsible for the appearance of these circles. Despite the fact that the volatile winds generally tend to rip things out of the ground and propel them skyward in chaotic fashion, this was generally considered to be satisfactory explanation. The farmer involved, a Mr. Cooper, remained unconvinced. He said, "I have never seen anything like it before. It certainly can't be wind or rain damage because I have seen plenty of that, and it is not just that regular." Mr. Cooper's housekeeper recalled hearing an unusual humming noise. A second set of circles appeared, a noise that lasted 20 minutes. Mr. Cooper's dog barked uncharacteristically for most of that night. An investigator named Ian Misglod interviewed Cooper and his neighborhood farmer, Mr. Skull, about evidence of human entry into their circles, but the farmer said no. Suspicious trails were evident in and out, just circles amid a virgin crop. The following summer, an electromechanical engineer named Pat Delgado was enjoying the privilege of quiet retirement in Hampshire when a friend wondered what he would make of the strange markings found in a field a few miles away at Chesafoot Heath. His curiosity aroused, Delgado drove to his horseshoe-shaped amphitheater, whereupon he encountered a sight that was to change his life. Below him, 3 imprints, one 51-foot and two 25.5-foot diameter circles with their centers in perfect linear alignment with the absence of tram lines, the characteristic ruts that nowadays run in parallel lines across most fields. 200 or so feet of pristine wheat surrounded the formation. It's perfectly upright, as if traced out with surgical instruments, with the absence of paths running in or out. Their positioning surely implied that in order to make these circles, either their creator had levitated from the ground or that these patterns have been imprinted from above. The impact on Delgado was profound. He took to studying these new reports in painstaking detail and began alerting the media to the unusual events dotting the English countryside. So let me stop here for a minute. For quite some time, this is known that 75% of the crop circles are in the UK. Every report brought new discovery and observation, one of the first being the persistent referencing to nearby Neolithic sites. For example, in 1981 at Lichfield, Hampshire, an invisible magnetic line connecting the centers of 2 crop circles was identical to the one running through the 2 prehistoric mounds a few yards to the north. Their respective 2 crop circles was identical to the one running through the 2 prehistoric mounds a few yards to the north. Their respective diameters were almost identical. By 1983, many crop circles were appearing below hill forts, quintuplets, large circles, below hill forts, quintuplets, large circles, surrounded by 4 small satellite circles, one of each point on the compass, like a Celtic cross. Appeared below the unusual horseshoe features of Clay Hill, Huffington, and Branton, and a 4th appeared in Chesafoot Heath. When yet another quintuplet surfaced later, below Brampton Fort, the clumsy appearance of the formation details aroused the suspicion of Miglos, as well as Bob Rickard, editor of Fortean Time, a magazine about unexplained phenomena. Indeed, it seemed as if a non-paranormal explanation was at hand on this occasion. After the Daily Express had scooped the story about real circles, a jealous Daily Mirror paid a local family, the Shepherds, to hoax this new pattern close to the original circles. Yet the Shepherds' handiwork showed clear signs of entry, not to mention clear indications of damage to the plants, thanks to their use of heavy chains to flatten the crops. The hoax aside, Terence Meaden's stationary whirlwind theory had to be expanded to accommodate these new developments. He had proposed that the 1983 inline triplets were the result of 3 whirlwinds, even though the circle's diameters had a mathematical ratio of 2.1, the same relationship that defines the octave in music. And now the quintuplets were a series of whirlwinds in a multi-vortex state, in which he proposed the inflowing vortical motion of the major whirlwind stabilized minor whirlwinds in a symmetrical alignment. In 1984, the previous year's quintuplets aroused the curiosity of a famous resident in Athelstan when they descended upon the Sussex home of the Labour Party's Foreign Secretary, Dennis Healy. Healy admitted he wasn't a believer in UFOs, yet the night the circles appeared below Cradle Hill, his wife had seen a strange bright light in the sky when he inspected the formation. Healy could find no rational explanation for it. Interestingly, a second Cradle Hill exists opposite Clay Hill in Westminster, home of Britain's most fertile location for UFO sightings. Meanwhile, Pat Delgado was now joined in his research by another perplexed individual, Colin Andrews, then chief electrical engineer for the Test Valley Borough Council in Hampshire. Together, they began to establish patterns of behavior such as springs, ponds, reservoirs, underground water tanks, and even the heart of the watershed itself. In one case, farmer Charles Hall of Cotherperton Lane Farm observed how the edge of a crop circle on his property was located within 16 feet of an old pond. He also mentioned that a second pond was still active in the north part of his estate. Weeks later, a second circle appeared within 300 feet of it. Contrary to the... This is incredible. This reminds me, I don't know how many I was reading the last time, of Veda Austin, who's been doing massive research with water and how it captures our emotions, our images, and how she's actually seen cuneiform writing in the water. I kid you not, when it's frozen and then photographed. So something's happening. Contrary to the natural reaction of downed plants responding to sunlight, an untouched crop circles at Gander Down demonstrated how the flattened stems made no attempt to regain their vertical posture, continuing instead to grow horizontally and to ripen. This would almost be impossible had the plants been damaged by force. To add to the mystery, the night before the formation was found, 2 senior citizens saw a UFO, a huge yellow-white circular object, standing on end like a funfair wheel, barely 200 yards away. Terrified, they reported the sighting to the police, who filed a report on this as an unidentified flying object. Andrews heard the report on his radio and rushed to the location, where he found police officers combing the area with searchlights. Little did they know that this UFO attribution would fit a future sighting elsewhere in Crop Circle County some years later. As a logical progression began to develop in the designs from one season to the next, one had to wonder just how intelligent this wind had become. At Goodsworth Clatford, another quintuplet had 3 of its satellites connected through their centers by the thinnest of orbital rings, but in a twist on the design theme. The plant along the rings weren't laid down as usual. They were bowed over so that their heads touched the ground. When the 1985 season had finished, Delgado organized a meeting with various interested parties to collate evidence and review the theories. One party in attendance was Lieutenant Colonel Hedgecombe, an officer from the nearby Army Air Base at Boscombe Down, whose pilots were showing increased interest in the crop formation, monitoring their appearance and taking photos. Colonel Hedgecombe argued against the hoax theory, but for the most part because hoaxers would have left tracks in the crop, and from his investigation, no such tracks were evident. Intrigued, Colonel Hedgecombe filed a report with the UFO investigation desk at the Ministry of Defense in London. The researchers began to wonder if someone or something was playing a game. Indeed, paranormal events seemed to follow them, as if attempting to demonstrate a supernatural force was masterminding the work. Colonel Andrews will never forget how he took home a sample of odd-looking soil from a new crop formation. In hindsight, the design appeared to have been premeditated for him to perform the task in the first place, for the circle and ring contained a novel feature, a straight pathway placed at exactly 120 degrees to magnetic north, running away from the perimeter of the ring. 15 feet along, the avenue tapered into an arrowhead shape, at the base of which appeared a small bowl-shaped hole with perfectly smooth sides. Andrews removed a sample from the spot and brought it to his office, which was protected by an extensive alarm system. For the next 2 weeks, the Andrews home turned into a supernatural amusement park. Minutes after the mysterious soil had been tucked away behind locked doors for the night, the infrared sensor in the empty office detected movement and activated one of the alarms. Andrews, a designer of alarm systems and appreciator of their shortcomings, paid little attention to the coincidence until the following morning. At 4:15 a.m., the perimeter alarm for the house rang. The electric time clock had failed and would not set, but the next day came back to life. A few nights later, it stopped working again at 4:15 a.m. That's, by the way, 10, which is 1, which is the sun. Just pay attention to the numbers, because this is very important. This time joined by these separately rigged office alarms whose microwave detector had been activated at the same time. To add to the chaos, the battery-operated wall clock had also decided to call it a day at 4:15 a.m. This state of affairs carried on for 14 mornings, a fact corroborated by the Andrews' sleep-deprived neighbors and the unamused local police. By now, a talented pilot named Busty Taylor had joined Delgado and Andrews. These three, along with Don Torsley, Paul Fuller, and Terrence Meaden, and Ian McLoggs, created a team which took one crop circle research with grace, and to all of whom we are indeed indebted for the vast volume of yearly data on the subject. Busty was on a routine aerial reconnaissance above Hampshire when he remarked to his passenger, "All we want now is to find all the formations we have seen so far wrapped into one." The next morning, the pair were flying over the exact spot where Busty had spoken these words when the very pattern he had requested appeared in the week below. Even better, it had a large water reservoir underneath it. As events and strange coincidences gathered momentum, a growing list of possible causes began to be put forward by various individuals and institutions as to what was responsible for disturbing the orderly English landscape with markings more typical of Star Trek than John Constable. Predictably, the capricious media adopted the theory of little green men, with crop circles designs now developing into more complex configurations. Terrence Meaden persisted with his stationary whirlwind theory, despite the fact that additions to alignment to or were superimposed over existing formations. But how could wind vortexes be conscious enough to return to the same exact location with pinpoint accuracy? As if to test Meaden's resolve, the circle makers, the collective term for the architects of the genuine phenomena, created a 54-foot diameter circle at Heborn Worthy. They swirled the plants in standard clockwise motion, but this time laid them towards the center with a thin band around the perimeter, swirled anti-clockwise and pointing away from the center. Further, when the stems were lifted, a second layer existed underneath, flattened, counter to the top one. Meaden tenaciously stuck to the weather explanation, arguing that the whirlwind had abruptly switched in its rotation. The circle makers later replied to this explanation by creating a formation with two annular rings around a circle, each element in contra-rotation to the next. Whether or not, the bewildered farmers, whose lives were becoming affected by increasing frequency by the singular phenomena, decided that the problem should be taken up by Parliament. Despite Delgado and Andrews' findings that a phenomena of supernatural possibility, extraterrestrial origin was manifesting, the British government decided, at least outwardly, to stand behind the convenient weather theory. In other words, there were no cause for alarm. Everything in the English countryside was normal, according to officials. But anything was but normal. Was the plethora of alternative theories, drunks with string with young wild farmers, disillusioned art students, out-of-work journalists, disinformed people from the military, over applications of fertilizer interference from mobile phones, flocks of geometrically gifted crows, even sex-mad hedgehogs. At some point in 1987, hot air balloons were asked to the list of probable ways one would drop into the middle of a field without leaving any signs of entry. To maneuver a balloon with its basket at head height and hold it motionless for a few hours while the guilty did their work without being spotted would be supernatural feat in itself. But since the plant media employed so far primarily wheat and barley were flexible and relatively easy to imprint by a descending object, some people felt seriously compelled to put this idea into the public domain. So the circle makers decided to switch to canola as the next worthy crop canvas. It's like energies. Given the nature of canola plants, it was no surprise that farmer David Steiner agreed to carry out scientific study on crop circles discovered in his bright yellow field. Canola stems are very brittle, snapping like celery if bent, and the plant in David's formation were clearly bent at the base, almost steamed into place. As if all crop circles before it, the plants were bent at a nearly right angle and an inch above the soil and just below the first nod, the plant's knuckles. Any damage to canola causes in yellow flowers will die, yet all the delicate flowers were intact. As if this weren't enough of a puzzle, Andrews and his father were measuring the circle when they saw a bright flash around them, followed by a distinctive noise like crackling. The sound was so loud it was heard 70 feet away by Andrew's mother sitting inside her car at the edge of the field with the windows rolled up. Strange noises like this became an incredibly common occurrence, particularly when Andrews visited a new site at Kimpton, an unusually oval ring approximately 30 feet across. "I've never seen anything like it before," explained the farmer, Mr. Flambard, astounded at the sight of it. Upon their return to the car, two young boys, unaware that Andrews was a researcher, told him they'd seen a glowing orange object hovering over the area he was examining. Later, unprompted, an elderly couple asked Andrews if he'd come to investigate the warbling, humming-like noises they'd heard emanating from the field a few days earlier. During further measurements and note-taking, Andrews was spooked by a sudden black shadow which blotted out the sun for an instant. Later that afternoon, his parents' dog scampered around the field until it froze at a spot adjacent to the ring. Within minutes, the dog was vomiting, and only when taken out of the immediate area did the luckless canine recover his vigor. Despite the litany of unnerving events, Andrews felt compelled to return in the evening, whereupon he looked up at the sky in quiet desperation and spoke out loud, God, if you would only give me a clue as to how these are created." In less than 10 seconds, he had a reply. According to Andrews' account, an electrical crackling noise started to come from a spot about 9 feet away. It grew louder up to a pitch where I expected a bang to follow. Frightened, I looked towards the village to check my quickest route out of the field. I fought to control my panic, and I remained still. As suddenly as it had started, it stopped. It had lasted about 6 seconds, although it seemed longer. I saw nothing, and nothing moved. It was now the summer of 1987, and reports of crop circles were increasing at a furious rate. In 124 period, 15 crop circles appeared around one master alone, and with them a rash of new discovery. Magnetic disturbances played havoc with compasses in some of the formations, and in terms of design, small circles were now superimposed over or overlapped by new formations, while others displayed an ever-increasing complexity of swirl detail. In one memorable incident, the night after local Wiltshire police were flooded with reports of UFO sightings, a large quintuplet formation appeared at Upton Skidmore bearing a remarkable anti-clockwise S-shaped swirl in 3 of the satellites, but reversed in the 4th. Meanwhile, 2 miles away north at Westbury, a circle containing half a revolution swirl was so impressive in its precision that researchers felt walking upon it would be sacrilegious. The Wingfield family, an interested group from Somerset, also experienced unusual flashes similar to the one described by Andrews standing alone on a hill while her family investigated a circle below. Mrs. Wingfield was confronted by a blue flashlight which seemed to be shining on the ground in front of her, pulsating every second or so as if it was reflecting off a spinning, shining surface somewhere above. Alarmed, she raced down the hill to join her husband, who, like Delgado and Andrews, was about to be bitten by the crop circle bug. The testimonials were piling up. Farmer Jeff Cooper got up one morning to be greeted with his own set of circles. One night, our dog went silly barking, real nasty like. Usually he would stop on a firm command, but not that night. He went on for ages. He was really upset. I wish now I had looked out, because when I did in the morning, I could see 5 circles had appeared in the cornfield during the night. I didn't know what caused it. I don't think they are made by people. We have tried to make them with ropes, poles, and so on, but they cannot be replicated. One discovery led to another, giving the impression that behind the phenomenon lay an orderly yet even premeditated plan. As the end of August 1987 approached, the list of anomalous features multiplied by the week, as did the pace of new reports, by now in the hundreds. But one more episode was brewing that would finish off the year in dramatic fashion. Just a short distance below the road from Stonehenge, upon the intermittently wooded Wiltshire plain, the small tower of Winterbourne, Stoke played a host an enormous 75-foot ring circle with 3 outlying satellite circles. It had swirl patterns so tight and compressed that from the air it looked as if it was spinning. Despite patterns so tight and compressed that from the air it looked as if it was spinning. Despite materializing on a high embankment beside the busy A303 London to Exeter Road, nothing more out of the ordinary was reported until 2 months later. At 5:06 p.m. on October 22nd, the Ministry of Defense suddenly found $13.5 million worth of its hardware missing. Shortly after, a pilot radioed in with nothing unusual to report. The military base at Boscombe Down lost radio contact with one of its Harrier jump jets. This audio disappearance happened over the precise spot where the crop circle formation had laid a few weeks earlier. Meanwhile, 90 miles southwest from the coast of Ireland, the crew of an American transport plane got the surprise of their lives when they sighted the Harrier casually flying out over the Atlantic, pilotless and minus a roof canopy. The following day, a rescue party discovered the body of the pilot alongside his reserve parachute and life raft a couple of hundred yards from the site of the mysterious circle. There were seemingly no answers to 2 questions. Why had the pilot ejected out of a perfectly operating plane? Why had the plane deviated by several degrees from its designated course just at the point where audio contact was lost? The ejector seat was never recovered. With such episodes gnawing away at their cynicism, the media's interest in crumpsicles began to warm up, and with it the public's curiosity. This increase in inquisitiveness was further fueled through the summer of 1988, where crop circle designs continued to evolve, such as the innovation of appearing in pairs on the same field on separate occasions. Of particular interest was a grouping of 3 30-foot circles, all perfectly aligned within an invisible equilateral triangle. Exactly a week later, the tender and previously flattened barley plants inside the circles began to regain their upright posture, and in a most exquisite fashion. According to the field report, the plants had risen selectively along their nodes in groups of 3 within an oblong area, roughly covering 2 feet by 1 foot. The first group of plants raised itself at the node nearest the ground, the second at the mid-node, and the third at the node nearest the seed head. The process was then repeated radially, creating a pattern now consistent of 7 concentric rings and 48 spokes, as if the plant had been programmed to grow back in selected fashion. Every circle was identical, according to agricultural expert Dr. Mark Glover. These features are definitely not the result of fertilizers, agrochemical treatment, disease, pest damage, soil type, or even plant behavior. With the weather theory being in a quandary, Terence Meaden's model of modified vortexes now required specific topographical features that enable crop circles to appear. That is, they could only appear on the leeward side of hills within days. 2 reports surfaced from the town of Legenberg in the flat prairie of Saskatchewan, where in the 1974 farmer Edwin Ferd had found 5 shiny silver discs hovering over his canola, making the plant sway. 15 minutes later, he saw the disc bolt in the sky, leaving behind 5 circles. A similar incident later occurred in the prairie of Manitoba. Back in England, the new crop formation similarly contradicted the Meaden's theory by moving to the open, rolling landscape around Europe's largest man-made pyramids, Sidbury Hill in Wiltshire. By July 1988, 51 formations lay within a 7-mile arc of this endemic prehistoric monument, and from its 400-foot summit, groups of circles like Celtic crosses gathered together like apostles, as if to collect a message to send out to the world. So this is from Freddy Silva's book. It was one of the first books that he wrote. He's absolutely brilliant. One of the things I've heard said, and I can attest to the truth of it, is that if you put a picture of a real crop circle anywhere healing, and you might think I'm crazy, but what the hell do we know? We're seeing some insane examples, and so you would actually buy the book, obviously, and maybe do a photocopy of the because they're pictures, they're color pictures in here, just so you know. They're not just black and white. But Freddy Silva has like all this sacred geometry, the flower of life. It's insane. I'm going to jump around because I wanted to kind of lay out the beginnings of this discussion so you could see how it was gaslit, right? And how it got to the point where it could no longer be gaslit. By the way, the UK is the heart chakra of the planet, on another side note. Okay, let me read this. Okay, I'm going to go right into sacred geometry because I think it's important. Just so you know, for your own, in case you buy the book. This is on chapter 10, just so you know, okay? So I'm going to read that. It's called, the chapter is called The Geometry of Crop Circles. Okay, I'm going to just, there's a great misconception as to why sacred geometry is sacred. Some believe that ancient people lacked sophistication and intelligence, so watching a bisection of lines create orderly geometric patterns constituted magic. Others argue that it was because of its association with buildings in which gods were worshipped and blood sacrifice were made to appease their wrath. Sacred or canonical geometry is not some obscure invention of the human mind, wrote Paul Devereaux, one of the world's leading writers on earth mysteries, but an extrapolation by it of the implied patterns in nature that frame the entry of energy into our space-time dimension. Let me read this again. Of the implied patterns in nature that frame the entry of energy into our time-space dimension, the formation of matter and the natural motions of the universe, from molecular vibration through the growth of organic form to the spin and motion of the planets, stars, and galaxies, are all governed by geometrical configuration of force. One can dissect a plant or a planet and not find the maker's blueprint anywhere inside. Of course, it is inherent. Sacred geometry is a mirror of the universe, and as such, it is timeless. It is also a form of communication that can be accessed at ancient places. As Devereux says, it is the ultimate system of language. As we are about to see in this chapter, we are rediscovering this language in crop circles. However, to establish the presence of sacred geometry in crop circles without first understanding its purpose and impact on society, the state of human consciousness, even is to miss a vital function of the glyphs. Let us then briefly examine sacred geometry in its place in the greater scheme of things. Our experience of and reaction to all things beautiful is made possible by our ability to distinguish order from chaos. When we recognize the perfection inherent in Greek temple or painting by Da Vinci, we're subconsciously responding to proportions bound by the universal laws of geometry. To quote the geometer Robert Lawlor, the practice of geometry was an approach to the way in which the universe is ordered and sustained. Geometric diagrams can be contemplated as still moments revealing a continuous, timeless, universal action generally hidden from our sensory perception. Thus, a seemingly common mathematical activity can become a discipline for intellectual and spiritual insight. A substantial body of evidence for this is found in the unlikeliest of sources, religions. As stated in Islam, particular Sufi, its mystical half, and echoed in the Jewish and Hindu religions, sacred geometry enables humanity to see the archetypal world of God. At its heart, the Arabic faith still contains an unadulterated snapshot of this primordial truth in geometric figures adorning its mosques and art forms. Consequently, Islam has served this primordial truth in geometric figures adorning its mosques and art forms. Consequently, Islam has served as curator and preserver, maintained the purity of the philosophy of geometry akin to the Pythagorean Platonic traditions of antiquity, but in a totally sacred universe free of the nationalism and rationalism which finally stifled and destroyed the esoteric traditions of Greek intellectuality, to quote the eminent Arabic historian S.H. Nas. It is not certain from which the terrestrial origin of this knowledge stems, since historian S.H. Nas. It is not certain from which the terrestrial origin of this knowledge stems, since the forms of sacred geometry are just as evident in Celtic, Tibetan, and Buddhist art, even in native North American sand painting. In other words, sacred geometry is a universal principle shared by culture or no contact with one another. One of the earliest known practitioners of sacred geometry were the Egyptians. Its proportions were embedded in the ground plans of their temples, their frescoes, and in the Great Pyramid at Giza, whose structures contain many mathematical laws since then attributed to Pythagoras. But always the enlightened Egyptians used geometry for all manners of terrestrial applications. Hence geometry, geometry, measure the earth. Their aim was metaphysical. Egyptologist John Anthony West postulates the whole of Egyptian civilization was based upon a complete and precise understanding of universal laws, and the profound understanding of manifested itself in a constant, coherent, and interrelated system that fused science, art, and religion into a single organic unity. The symbolic language of Egypt, together with its texts on medicine, mathematics, and science, demonstrates the Egyptians knew how the world works, and they did so without the advantages of computers or electron microscopes, proving that one does not need advanced technology to access or understand the finer realms of life. And because the Egyptians recognized sacred geometry as the mechanism of the heavens, they applied it liberally across the landscape for millennia as a way to bestow universal order on earth, a concept encapsulated in the Hermetic maximus, as above, so below. Such obvious benefits did not go unnoticed by other enlightened groups, as above, so below. Such obvious benefits did not go unnoticed by other enlightened groups, and permanent expression of this knowledge were subsequently erected for posterity throughout Europe in the form of the Pantheon, the Temple of Delphi, Icon Cathedral, whose chapel bears identical ground plan measurement to Stonehenge, Chartres Cathedral, one of the most impressive hymns to sacred geometry. The knowledge made its way north to the British Isles, for it's immortalized in Stonehenge. In fact, the tradition was already well in use throughout Britain some 3,000 years ago, before the Greek mathematician as evidenced by the formula adopted for the construction of stone circles. Obviously, the principles of sacred geometry were important enough for scholars and architects to go enormous lengths to preserve it for future generations. Well, that was the idea. Those practices were abolished as a form of study by order of Emperor Theodosius in 399 AD. The net effect before the rise of the Middle Age. Slowly and corrosively, codes for life in harmony with the universe gave way to a predilection for violence, intolerance, terror, and persecution. The last great works based on sacred geometry, namely the Gothic and early Renaissance, were kept alive by Plato, the works of Vitruvius, and whatever Hermetic and Kabbalistic writings and philosophy survived suppression by the emerging Catholic Inquisition. With the move towards an analytic view of the world, connections to holistic and metaphysical practices were severed, and by the time Newton and the scientific secularism of the 17th century prevailed, rational logic had gained such dominance that all esoteric knowledge was condemned as a cult. By the 20th century, this masculine, left-brain worldview had reached its nadir. Man placed nature over a barrel, harnessing its power, taming its ways, and desecrating its resources to fuel progress. The dubious high point of this culture has given us the nuclear age and saddled us with a few byproducts: global urbanization, depletion of resources, and toxification of the earth, which social scientists point out has fueled a meteoric rise in human alienation and criminal behavior. I'm going to stop for a minute. Because what I'm getting with many of you is that who are listening, because this is really scholarly work. It's scholarly. He is an incredible teacher. Again, this is Freddy Silva. And did you hear what they said? As we eradicated sacred geometry from our day-to-day, our labyrinth, our stones, our structures that we were creating, the mosques, temples, the way they were created, the rise of human separation from each other, the rise of crime, of rage, of greed, began to pollinate the world. So we've been told a lot of things about indigenous people and what they did. And the download I'm getting about sacrifice being something that was happening, let's say 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, I don't believe that. I don't believe there was that consciousness, because there's a harmony in sacred geometry. There are people that are very wealthy that have built their homes in a pyramid structure. They feel more energized. They've studied little pyramids over a fruit bowl. Swear to God, I'm sure you've seen it. A fruit bowl as compared to just the same fruit, purchased the same day with just in a fruit bowl, and next to the pyramid over it, and the fruit bowl with the pyramid does not age, does not decay as fast. It does not. So this is quite interesting, I think. I'm going to continue. Okay? Not surprisingly, worship at our ancient temples is today rarely done for the purpose of enlightenment, but for a snapshot and a souvenir. As these temples became relegated to mere curiosities from an age gone by, so our wonder of the unseen and our connection to the sacred disappears. And I'm going to point you, if you can look it up on Gaia.com, there is a show he does with Regina Meredith where they go to these ancient caves. I think it's either Sardinia or Sicily. I think it's Sardinia, though. There's these ancient caves, and it's for women. And the first cave is the cave of the maiden, the virgin. The second cave is the cave of the mother. And the third cave is the cave, I hate using that term, but it's of the crone. And Regina actually meditated in each of the cave, and there was profound healing going on. And Freddy Silva, being a masculine, obviously, felt almost like he was doing something sacrilegious in entering the caves to also do his own meditation. You'll see that. If you look it up, you can look it up and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a very interesting show. And so pattern emerges. The more disconnect we become from the universal order, the more dysfunctional we become as a society. And the longer our umbilical connection remains severed, the more we rely on rationalization. Do you see? Rational thinking, 3D thinking. We're no longer in our mystical truth. So the further we stray from spirituality, the vicious circle is compounded by Western language being a separatist language, as Lawler explains. Modern thought has difficult access to the concept of the archetypal because European language requires that verbs or action words be associated with nouns. We therefore have no linguistic forms with which to imagine a process or activity that has no material carrier. Yet in Eastern languages, subject and object are one. Japanese lovers do not declare to one another, I love you. They declare, Heishuturi. Subject and object are one. Japanese lovers do not declare to one another, I love you. They declare, Heishuturi, loving. Subject and object are merged into wholeness, and such a linguistic foundation is probably what enables people of the East to accept the mystical side of life more readily than their Western counterparts. Thankfully, the universe moves in waves, and the cycle of darkness in it is inevitably moving once again towards enlightenment. For one thing, science is discovering the geometry within nature. During a demonstration at an electron microscope before the American Society for the Advancement of Science in 1937, it was discovered that the crystalline structure of tungents is composed of 9 atoms geometrically arranged like a cube. Since then, science has further discovered that the physical structure of elements is governed by geometric arrays surrounded at central points. So the general assumption that the nature of matter is fundamentally composed of solid particles has given way to quantum physics, which shows that a subatomic level matter is empty and at its heart lie patterns of energy. The irony here is that by acknowledging geometry as the fundamental basis of matter, science has adopted the stance taken by ancient cultures, elevating these supposed stone-wielding loincloth primitives to highest rank. Little wonder then that these harmonic laws were so important to the temple builders that there are the laws behind the universe. And since the universe was created by God, they reason that to embed the harmonic ratios governing the temporal movement of the heavens into these physical structures, the power and the knowledge of the firmament could be bestowed upon the earth. So temples became doorways into the mechanics of the physical world and the inner world of consciousness, and the interference would enable anyone to connect with finer levels of awareness. The Knights Templars built the Cathedral of Chartres, 50 kilometers from Paris. They built it using sacred geometry. Why? because they came from the Crusades and most likely learned from the Arabs that reality, that truth. Today, as alienation from all forms of spirituality and universal wonders reach epidemic proportions, expression of sacred geometry and symbols bearing the hallmarks of an ancient philosophy of harmony are manifesting in our fields. Even skeptics will admit that crop circle designs exhibit a harmony pleasing to the eye, much like an ancient temple or a classical painting. The proportions are balanced, the shapes rhythmic, the symbols dynamic. Even an outlaying grape shot appears to stand like a sentinel at its remote location by premeditating design. By analyzing crop circles in accordance with the laws of sacred geometry and its many expressions, one begins to appreciate the mastermind behind their conception, and which develop proportionally by outward expansion a regenerative principle fundamental to organic life, the circle is representative of the Creator's principle of cosmic life from the smallest atom to the largest planet. It has no beginning and no end. All things are divided from within it, and paradoxically, all things are contained within it. It is expressed by all cultures, past and present, as a symbol of the unknowable, of spirit, and the breath of the universe. It is also the foundation of the entire crop circle enigma. Even the Koch fractal, with its expanding hexagonal mosaics, begins as a large central circle of clockwise spiraled plants. Okay, so I'm going to jump. It's an extraordinary book. He has a book on the Knights Templars, and he discovered things that no one has ever discovered. I think we should go right. Let me see if I can find something on the... Okay, yeah, I've heard about... Okay, this is chapter 12, okay? And it's The Dragon Awakes. The Dragon Awakes. Okay, I'm going to read this quote. Without exceptions, every megalithic monument is in a certain relationship with subterranean currents which pass, cross, or surround them. Louis Merrill and Charles Diot, archaeologists, 1935. Avebury Stone Circle, Europe's largest repository of earth energies. Most of the hundreds of stones that originally made up its avenues were destroyed by Puritans and fundamentalist religious fanatics in the 18th century. The year 1969 saw the publication of The Pattern of the Past, an influential book by Guy Underwood investigating the presence of electromagnetic energy patterns at sacred sites. He wrote, "The energy's main characteristics as that appears to be generated within the earth and to cause wave motion perpendicular to Earth's surface, that it has great penetrative powers, that it affects the nerve cells of animals, that it forms spiral patterns, and is controlled by mathematical laws involving principally the number 3, 7, until it can be otherwise identified. I shall refer to it as the earth force. It could be an unknown principle, but it seems more likely that it is an unrecognizable effect of some already established forces, such as magnetism or gravity. The earth force manifests itself in lines, discontinuing, which I call geodetic lines, and which form a network on the surface of the earth. The lower animals instinctively perceive and use the lines, and their behavior is considerably affected by them. Man is similarly affected, but less strongly, and cannot usually perceive lines without artificial assistance." Not surprisingly, Underwood's words and book created a resurgence of interest in the ancient landscape. Underwood's geodetic lines are what the Chinese refer to as dragon paths or lung mi. The Aborigines as song lines, and the Irish as fairy paths. Wow. Thorough investigation into earth energies conclude that Britain's, if not the entire globe, is crisscrossed with a network of male and female lines of energy, also termed positive and negative in terms of polarity. Holy shit. The most important discovery at that time was that thousands of stone circles, obelisks, tumuli, henges, hill forts, long barrows, pagan worship sites, and churches were deliberately sited upon the intersection points of these lines called nodes. I learned from a British Army tank regiment sergeant that on occasion during maneuvers in Salisbury Plain, their compasses would deviate noticeably at particular locations. These turned out to be geodetic lines that connected nearby tumuli with local church mounds, and yet the general archaeological stance is that earthen mounds are graves, sacrificial sites, or ancient military fortifications. Considering that only 5% of excavated sites have actually yielded skeletal remains, this view seems myopic. Like the British tumuli, many Egyptian pyramids have been labeled tombs. Like the British tumuli, many Egyptian pyramids have been supports this. Only during the Saint period, 663 to 528 period, 663 to 525 BC, did it become fashionable to build tombs in the shape of pyramids. In fact, recent evidence strongly suggests that the Great Pyramid at Giza was strategically a sited power plant. And after we've seen the X-ray, radiograph X-ray of the pyramids of Giza and what's underneath it, no kidding, I believe that. There is also the unsettling question of why people who supposedly lack technological means sought to shape by hand some of the hardest stones known to humanity, then to move these stones weighing as much as 50 tons across relatively vast distances to bury dead relatives, sacrifice a goat, or prevent their neighbors from stealing their wives. There is no doubt that throughout their lives, a span of times covering 12,000 years, these sites were adopted for all manner of uses, depending on the need and dictum of the day. In my travels, I've come across colossal dolmens used to house rabbits and sheep, but I doubt the original intention was to provide safe shelter for livestock. The monuments of man are not exempt from the ebb and flow of life, and such rhythm brings change. A Roman amphitheater that once provided the gruesome gladiatorial entertainment of lions and Christians fighting today hosts a pop band. What is today a grandiose London hotel was once a hospital caring for soldiers injured in the First World War. Similarly, hang on, I've got a puzzle thing I gotta do. Similarly, buildings on sacred sites were originally erected for other reasons. The etymology of temple signifies a division between sacred and profane space, suggesting that temples facilitate access from one place to another. In the Giza pyramids, for example, the passageways are often deliberately set low, requiring the initiate to stop in humility. In many Neolithic long barrows, the passageways takes one westward to die in the profane world, to be reborn in the east, hence the original meaning of orientation. And Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris initiates walk through St. Anne's door in the west, indicating the setting of the light and immersion in the dark forces of chaos, and then proceed towards the east and rebirth in the rising light. The majority of sacred sites, not to mention most Christian churches built upon them, work in this manner, suggesting their original function was to be points of entry for the fertilization and the power of heaven. Obviously, there's much more to ancient sites of veneration than meets the eye. By establishing a link between these doorways of energy, sometimes called dragon energy, and the forces of transformation, we can begin to answer the remaining riddles behind the crop circles, namely their deliberate placement near ancient sites, their energies, anomalies, and their association with heightened states of awareness. However, looking what lies behind sacred sites, particularly their misuse during the past 1,000 years, reveals why crop circles are causing such consternation among the authorities, religious orders notwithstanding. One of the earliest references to dragon energy appears in the 1st century AD in Decline of the Oracles by Plutarch. who refers to the streams of terrestrial energies influenced by the sun and the celestial bodies that activate oracles and places of invocation. This energy was recognized by early Chinese geomancers as qi, its Christian equivalent being the Holy Spirit. Stone circles and barrows were erected at sites where their energy was consecrated, and consequently they were seen as places where healing or heightened states of awareness could be promoted in accordance with particular phases of the new lunar cycle and the equinoxes when the energy is at its peak. In Timorous, Plato shows that the geodetic forces, particularly when manifested in spiral forms, is a catalyst in the construction of matter, and as a part of the generative power of nature through which life comes into being. Its equilibrium is maintained. Consequently, animals in enclosed spaces, when they're about to give birth, try to break out to seek spots where energy upwells from the earth. Do you understand? This is why you have to walk barefoot. This is also why you have to work on your chakras, spinning them clockwise, not counterclockwise. Wow. Let me continue. That such health-giving properties are instinctively recognized by animals is one reason why the spiral symbol has been held in sanctity, sometimes in the guise of a serpent or dragon, and why Acupullatius and Elatia, the gods of medicine and childbirth, respectively, were always associated with snakes. This concept is depicted in the Egyptian emblem of the caduceus, its twin serpents entwined around a staff. This allegory, it's funny, so Kundalini rising, the snake at the base of our spines. This allegorical concept of megalithic man harnessing the beneficial powers of the earth with a shaft of stone is mimicked as Christianized sacred sites today in the image of St. George skewering a luckless dragon. Singular and erect, the phallic standing stone in the umbilical connection between the energies of heaven and earth. This type of pillar in Portugal is called a Hitlo. Okay, I'm going to spell it. No, hang on, I can't really read it. Betilo, B-E-T-I-L-O, stemming from the Semitic Bethel, meaning house of God. Hence Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. These stones carefully chosen meaning house of God. Hence Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. These stones, carefully chosen for their high level of quartz with its electrical and information storage properties, were located at nodes where they could magnetize charge. With these stones arranged geometrically, they created chambers with resonant acoustical properties such as long barrels. Acoustical experiments in the Kern Unistone Chamber in Cornwall show concentric rings of resonance whose position are governed by Hawkins' square ratio for crop circles. Tests performed at Neolithic sites show that electromagnetic readings are unmistakably different from these sites, and that psychic abilities is greatly enhanced, just as it is in crop circles. The surrounding earthen embankment of hill forts and stone circles provide shielding that reduces outside electromagnetic interference, allowing the individual to tune in to station we normally tune out, to quote Colin Wilson. Thus, information is received with greater clarity and efficiency by the radio that is the human being and its resonant antenna, the spine and DNA coil. The resonance found at sacred points such as Delphi, Stonehenge, and the pyramids is 7.8 hertz. And it corresponds to the brainwaves frequency of mystics and healers, 30 hertz, being the typical wakeful state. Becker and Selden, 1985, provided that one of the grand purpose behind these sites was to facilitate the mind into a state of receptivity. Hence why many sites associated with transformation have the trident of El Aeon inscribed in their stone walls, the same symbol that graces the head of the other signs of transformation. The 1990 Alton Prior's pictograms. The organized religion knew and feared this ability of individuals to receive spiritual guidance at pagan sites is seen by the way it supplanted its own structures upon them, sometimes with little subtlety. During its laborious struggle to maintain control of Europe, a dying Roman Empire created the Catholic Church, and through its offices issued many edicts which sought to eradicate pagan faith and megalithic sites and other oracles. As early as 640 AD, the Bishop of Noyon warned, "Let no Christians place lights at the temple or the stones or the fountains or the trees enclosure. Let no one presume to make lustrinish or to enchant orbs or to make flocks pass through a hollow of a tree or an aperture of the earth, for by doing so he seems to consecrate them to the devil." The devil. Wow. The work of the devil, of course, being any knowledge pursuant outside the strict confines of orthodox belief. Obviously, the pagans did not share the Roman Catholic syndicate's opinion that use of sacred sites in any way connected them with the forces of hell. And for 300 years later, the clergy were still instructed to forbid well worship and divination with various trees and stones. By the 11th century, it seems the needle got stuck in the groove. No one. Pope Gregory reaffirmed, "Shall go to tree or wells or stones or enclosures of anywhere else," and so forth. In their desperation, the church forced women who cured their children at sacred sites to fast for 3 years. At one point, it even became a criminal offense not to attend Mass. And yet, as the sites of stones were proving so beneficial, orders for their as the sites of stones were proving so beneficial, orders for their destructions met with limited success. So in a change of strategy, the church assimilated them, as the letter from Pope Gregory to St. Augustine shows. By no means destroy the temples of the idols belonging to the English, but only the idols which are found in them. Let altars be constructed and relics placed in them. This is why if you've ever been to Europe and you walk into these very old churches, you feel peace, which makes no sense. Now I know why. I used to think it was just, prayers. No, it's actually these sacred sites of these old little churches, like 300-400 years old or older. Wow. These orders covered the length and breadth of Europe, but things became more sinister, for in its zeal, the church began to play down the connection of sights with the unseen, as cited in the fatherly advice of the Bishop of Lamego, Portugal. "Be damned all who believe that the souls and bodies of men are subject to the influence of the stars." This came from the same people who subsequently adopted the use of amulets, rosaries, and then claimed as their own the pagan rites of praise they condemned. So much for the virtues of charity and tolerance extolled by the early Roman Catholic Church. Hopefully you'll go buy the book on eBay or on Amazon or whatever. And hopefully you'll continue reading it. He's also written there's 2 books I'm going to recommend to you. One is called The Portal. It just came out about a year ago. And the other book is Divine Blueprint. And in Divine Blueprint, he talks about how to create sacred space in your home. So I'm going to leave it here. I wanted to share that. I wanted to kind of shift the energies just so that you realize that we are walking to 5D, New Earth, and we have to reclaim what was lost, what was oppressed. And we have to just remember ourselves. We have to remember, because you realize that if you're listening to me, because this is pretty scholarly, and we have 4 people here. Well, let me just say congratulations, because this is our own history when we were here as druids, druidesses, high priests, and priestesses, when we were really connecting with the elements, the sky and the earth, and when we understood how to create sacred powers with stones, with structure, using sacred geometry and so forth, and using water as an activator, as a conduit to bring even more potency to the structures we were building. We've come back. And we are going to have to re-architect what's about to fucking collapse. Anyway, sending you much love on your journey. This whole thing will be on YouTube. Please follow me on YouTube. I'll upload it tonight. And I might be in the mood to crack open Divine Blueprint and read some excerpts from that. And so that it drives you to buy the books. I'm not getting any commission. Trust me. Obviously there's no fucking shopping cart here. But anyway, sending you much love on your journey. Namaste.